Hi, and thanks for hitting the snooze button. My name's Neil Headley. I figured that my lifelong battle with insomnia had a lot to do with my job and waking up for morning television and radio for the past 30 plus years. But I did some digging and discovered that I had a ton more to learn. So in this series, we're going to try to fix your sleep by figuring out why mine is so horribly broken, and maybe we stumble upon some answers together. A couple familiar voices on this week's show, getting into one subject with two different groups of people. We're talking about COVIDsomnia, a new term that's been coined for the various sleep problems that come along with a global pandemic. Later, we're going to get into the impact that COVID-19 is having on adults and their sleep with Dr. Seema Khosla from the North Dakota Centre for Sleep. You might also have seen her just recently as the sleep expert on Good Morning America. But first, we're going to talk about what COVID is doing to the way our kids are sleeping with Dr. Linnell Schneeberg, the assistant professor at Yale School of Medicine and director of the behavioral sleep program at Connecticut Children's Medical Center. Plus, she's the author of Become Your Child's Sleep Coach. Well, Linnell, even though it's been a little while since you've been on the show, I think the same first question still applies. How did you sleep last night?
Thank you for always asking, and I slept really well. How about you?
I'm still a work in progress. At least now I feel better about the tracking that I'm doing because now I went from my ridiculous Fitbit to my ridiculous Dream 2 headband, which is at least, I think is giving me slightly better and more interesting numbers. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the day when I can put all the sleep issues in the rearview mirror. But there's a lot of things that I want to experiment with and try. It's interesting, though, I picked a terrible time to be trying to learn how to sleep better because everybody's focused right now on COVID and the crazy dreams that people are having in the middle of COVID. And even now there's the new word that we've all come up with, COVIDsomnia. But it's interesting that about 98, I would say, % of the conversation that I hear about insomnia as it relates to COVID has to do with adults. And you're one of the few lone voices in the wilderness, talking about how this is impacting our kids. So what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it is definitely impacting kids as well. So I kind of think about it in three domains, right? So schedules are not what they used to be for most of us, wouldn't you say? And then the physical activity piece that used to help kids sleep well, some of that's gone too, right? For some of those same reasons that we've been talking about. And then anxiety, right? So adults are more anxious and kids pick up on that. So those are sort of the three domains that I see as part of the cause of COVIDsomnia for children.
Is it just a case of reinforcing the things that we were supposed to do all along with sleep hygiene and such, or are there specific things we should be doing related to this particular interference, let's call it?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that we can add to the usual toolbox, actually, during these difficult times. So, for example, I think we have to be a little bit more creative about how to get that physical activity in for kids. And sometimes that means that maybe the whole family is doing something together, where a child maybe used to get the physical activity at recess or some sort of school-related activity. Some of those aren't happening in the same ways. And so maybe the family changes how they do their own physical activity. Maybe you go together for a bike ride after dinner or a walk in the middle of the day if you're doing some homeschooling. So I think that piece you have to be a little bit more creative than we used to be. The other time of day that we might want to try a couple of new tools would be the bedtime. So for example, when things quiet down and we're tucking our kids in at night, sometimes they will bring up things that they're worried about in the daytime.
Sure.
And we do like, of course, to hear about what our kids are worried about. But the problem is that when we associate that with their bed and their bedroom, that's not necessarily exactly what we want to connect, right? We don't really want to connect worries and deep talks, so to speak, with the bed and with bedtime, right? Because the bed should be a real sanctuary, a real place of peace and comfort and happiness. So a really great trick is what's called the worry jar. Some people call it worry time. And what that means is that you just keep a little jar in your child's bedroom and some little pieces of paper. And if they bring up a worry at night, you can say, you know what, that belongs in your worry jar for our worry time tomorrow. Let's write it down together. Write it down, put it in the jar. And then the next day you set aside some time one-on-one with your child, some really special, time with just mom or just dad. And maybe it's about 20 minutes long, and you pull the little pieces of paper out of the worry jar and you go through them with your child. And if you have a little time left in the 20 or 30 minutes, you still allot that time to your child for doing something else, maybe a craft, maybe a project. So they still get that one-on-one time with you, whether they fill it all with worry or whether they don't. And it's kind of a really gentle, sweet way to send the message that your bed's not for worrying, but we're going to collect those things that you're thinking about, and we're definitely going to address them, just not in your bed, in your bedroom.
Is this a time that you think, when we're all trying to navigate what school, there's still all kinds of areas that are still trying to figure out how to do school properly right now and navigate, are kids in class? Are they learning, remotely, all those sorts of things. We had started before all of this, before COVID took over, we had started having conversations about pushing start times for our kids' schools later. But then COVID came along and threw a monkey wrench into everything, because some kids are attending remotely, some kids are going half the week. I know my daughter, who goes to school, high school just north of you, she goes to South Windsor High. They are in class 2 days a week. They're remote 2 days a week. And then I think Wednesday, her school closes and shuts down for cleaning. And so they're only basically around their own germs, so they're in school Monday, they come back Tuesday, then there's a day off to clean the school, and then Thursday and Friday it's all the kids that weren't there the rest of the time. Is it going to be easier after COVID is in the rearview mirror to have a conversation about when our kids actually start their school day?
I think it is. I think you're right about that. Because remember, there were months and months where no one went to school at all, which meant that you didn't have to log in until a certain time of the morning, which by definition was almost always later than when you had to get on a bus.
Sure.
And what I've found with a lot of the adolescents that I see is their grades came up because they didn't have to log in until 9 o'clock, let's say, which means honestly, they didn't have to wake up until 8:45.
Yeah, true. Just roll out of bed, prop yourself up in front of the screen, you're good to go.
Yeah, but before that, remember when they had to wake up? 5:30, 6 in the morning. So some of these kids are getting 2 or 3 more hours almost of sleep, and you could see them thriving.
So what's it going to take for us as parents? And I want to focus on the school piece again for a second here.
Yeah.
What do parents need to do to use these success stories as a tool going forward? Because I'm sure that parents are seeing the improvements in their kids. I wonder if the schools sort of even have time to notice, because they are, so many of them, just kind of drowning in the logistics of all of it. So is this something that parents can sort of put a pin in and maybe go back to their teachers or their school districts or whatever and say, look at what happened to the grades when the kids could start their day later? Is that the best approach, or what do you think needs to happen next?
I think that's a great approach. So I think what you have to think about is, what are the groups that hold the power in terms of later school start times? And I always think of them as the PTA or PTO, whatever it's called where you live, and the school board. So any parent who's really noticed, wow, my child really did better when they got more sleep, right? And they still did all their work and everything still worked out just fine. I think those parents can be advocates to either the PTA, PTO, or school board. And there's a national clearinghouse now called Start School Later, based in Washington, D.C., and they exist really to be facilitators of these discussions in various communities, right? And so they can help you sort of, where do you go? Do you have any materials that I can use as I'm making my case? But I think what's really happened is some parents who really weren't sold on this whole starting school later idea, it's now just been shown to them. It's right in front of them and they saw it happen, which is one of the silver linings of COVID, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, that's one of those areas. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today. We were talking about the silver linings and this idea that, we get to choose which things we go back to when all of this is over versus choosing new habits, choosing new pathways, new ways of looking at things, and it doesn't just come down to the offices who are saying, hey, our employees are more productive when they're at home, so we don't need our swanky downtown office space. It even comes into things like, when do we start work? When do we start school? Are those things serving us? And it also trickles down, I think, to our workout schedules and all those kinds of things. What do we actually want to save and hang on to when normal comes back? And I'm grateful I had the opportunity to kind of touch base with you on this because, there are so many parents, I think, who are just trying to navigate their own stuff as well. And so making sure that the kids and their sleep and all of that are taken care of, I hope hasn't fallen by the wayside, but it's good to be able to get an extra set of eyes on it, especially eyes that are as eminently qualified as yours. So thanks for making a little time for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think, helping kids sleep well during this difficult time is a really important piece of everybody doing well through it. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
That's Dr. Linnell Schneeberg. Links to her work, including a link to her terrific book, Become Your Child's Sleep Coach, available in the show notes and on our website at thesnoozebutton.com. Now, the impact of COVIDsomnia in the adult population with Dr. Seema Khosla, board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary disease, critical care medicine, sleep medicine, medical director of the North Dakota Centre for Sleep, and the host of the Talking Sleep podcast, published by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. All right, so joining the show again this week from, what's it called? North Dakota?
Ha.
Really? North Dakota it's called now?
It is a hashtag.
Oh, boy.
It's a real thing.
Seema, I'm sorry.
I know.
Okay, well, first of all, before I get... And it's interesting we're having this conversation on the heels of the conversation that I just had with Linnell about what COVIDsomnia is doing to our kids. But talk to me about being in North Dakota, and first of all, why is it North Dakota? Are you having a lot of cases there right now?
Per capita, we are number one, my friend.
Seriously?
Seriously, across the U.S.
Okay, so why is that happening? Is it because, I mean, it's obviously you can't point to what people were pointing at with New York City and places like that early on where they were saying it was population density because it's North Dakota, for crying out loud.
Right. We are the original social distancers.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. No, and it's hard to pinpoint, but I think a lot of it has to do with messaging and beliefs and there isn't a mask mandate in North Dakota, in Fargo. I live on the Minnesota side, and we do have a mask mandate. And so it's very interesting to see how people react on the Minnesota side versus the North Dakota side. But no, I mean, it's time to reevaluate because clearly what we're doing is not working. We can't just rely on how socially distanced we are, especially, it's getting cold. It's already snowed once. So we're going to be inside a lot more.
It's interesting when you talk about the social distancing part of it because the horn I've been tooting for months now is that, 6 feet was never really, I don't know if there is anyone in science that I'm aware of that actually thinks 6 feet is effective. We settled on 6 feet because people figured that 6 feet was manageable for the general public.
Right, as opposed to 17.
Yeah, because that's exactly the number. It's supposed to be 17 feet. But everybody looked around and went, nobody's going to do 17 feet. Let's just tell them it's 6 because 6 is better than 0.
Well, and that sort of came out of earlier data too, right? And then and that's the whole thing. This is new. It's okay that we didn't know at the beginning, right? But we need to adapt as we learn more. We can't just hold on to this idea of wearing a mask is oppressive, right? It's inconvenient. I don't like wearing a mask either. But let's not confuse inconvenience with oppression. It's not the same thing.
No, they're totally not. So don't even get me started on the whole conveniences thing, because I was on one of the things I do in my multiple other lives is I sit on national television on Saturday mornings, and they make the mistake of asking me for my opinion on things. And I went off this weekend in a discussion about conveniences and how the reason that the numbers are where they are. I said, look at New Zealand. New Zealand went into a lockdown and eradicated it until they let some people in who brought it back. That's how you do it. I said, apparently in North America, we are so much more concerned about our conveniences than we are about our health. We're whining and complaining about, look, one of the big stories here in my neck of the woods over the weekend was that they closed the gyms in the Toronto area, but about a half hour's drive north of Toronto, in that region, the gyms are still open. And so all the people from Toronto are bringing their germs into all these suburban areas, and now you're starting to see cases in the suburbs because all the people from Toronto are showing up at the gym. And I'm just, stop with the going to the gym. Stop.
Well, and that's, when did we stop caring about our neighbor? Like,
Bingo.
That's the thing that really bothers me about this, that we're so caught up in our own world. You know, at what point did it become okay? Like, I would love to drive 200 miles an hour in my car, right? I don't, right? Because it's not safe for other people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a perfect illustration of that. Might be one of the best illustrations of it I've ever heard. But let's climb off the soapbox for a second and get down to the what that does for you on a day-to-day basis. I mean, not to violate anyone's doctor-patient confidentiality, but is COVID having any kind of an impact among your patients? Is it having any impact with your practice?
So I thought I was in a bubble, doing sleep medicine. It's outpatient. It's not urgent, right? I've had 11 patients with COVID.
What?
Yeah. And it's surprising. And of course, it's escalating. I think I had 3 in a day last week. And, so if I put my little scientific sort of sleep geek hat on, we look at Cpap downloads and we're like, ooh, I see this change, and it sort of correlates to their symptoms. And then, you see that their sleep apnea isn't as well controlled. And then as they get better, the numbers get better. So, from a scientific standpoint, it's kind of interesting, right? And then we'd have these new conversations with our patients about, well, is it safe to wear your Cpap? We know that Cpap, right? It's aerosol generating. And so we know that makes, if you are sick, it makes everything spread further. So then that becomes dangerous for your bed partner, right? And the recommendation is to isolate.
Okay, so what does COVID, and I'm assuming it's probably different for everybody, but is there a baseline of here's what COVID does to your sleep?
So we're seeing
like
everything.
How is it showing up for you?
For me, I'm seeing a change in the control of their sleep apnea. So the Cpap machine, it's really kind of a cool thing where it measures airflow, and then it calculates how many times you have stopped breathing per hour. And we know that, our goal on that download is to make sure that you're less than 5 an hour. Right. And so sometimes we'll see this transient increase when people have allergies, or if they have surgery, or they're on pain medications or something like that. And we're seeing something similar with COVID. We're also seeing sometimes people will have just a ton of usage hours where all of a sudden they're sleeping like 12 hours a night. And you look, and it's like a week, and you're like, what is happening right now? 18 hours. And you're like, okay, hang on. What is going on right now? And It's because they're not feeling well. And then, of course, we've got this flip side, this other group of people that can't sleep. They've got this terrible insomnia. And so some of it is sort of not related to actually being sick with COVID. It's the anxiety about getting it and stress about work and stress, all that whole thing, right? But then there's this other really real thing that we're seeing when people have COVID and they're recovering, that there's this weird insomnia that some people are getting.
And so is it just, I'm assuming it becomes more difficult to treat the insomnia. And do you even treat the insomnia? Because once the COVID is gone, then you've shifted again with whatever was, you know what I'm saying?
But there lies the rub, my friend. Because sleep is important to help you heal. So if you're not sleeping, you're not going to get over your COVID.
But doesn't the treatment probably, and this is me absolutely displaying my layperson colors in full bloom, won't the treatment change because now it's COVID that is related to the insomnia?
Yes and no. Sometimes we'll resort to a sleep aid just to let them get some semblance of sleep. Let them have a little bit of Ambien or something, get into a better sleep pattern. Because some of it is anxiety and some of it is, this idea that if you know that you're going to struggle with your sleep, you put it off and put it off and put it off.
Sure.
And sometimes you just need to reset. Now, having said that, if they've developed new sleep apnea, for example, which we sometimes see after people get really sick with any sort of pulmonary thing, we absolutely look for that too.
Wow. Okay.
It's a whole world.
And I mean, you talk about it being outpatient. I mean, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess nobody's clamoring to get into a sleep lab right now.
Yes and no. Again, we do have, so for us in Fargo, we've had to shut down testing a couple of times just because the amount of COVID in our communities has gone up. And so we always want to make sure that we're being safe because, it's our patients, it's the patient next door, and that's our tech, right? So we've got to make sure that they're safe, and we have them in PPE, and we have viral filters, and we have this whole, the whole shebang. Some people really want to get in to get an answer, right? And for us in the U.S., COVID made a lot of people meet their deductible. And so now they're like, I need my sleep study now before year end. Right? Which you guys don't get, you guys don't have to worry about. But it's a very, very real thing for us. And so, yeah, we have that year-end sort of push that, yay, I've met my deductible. Now let me catch up on all the stuff I probably should have done, earlier this year or last year. Let me catch up with it now. New Year's. It's true. Get me in before year-end. And so, and it's interesting when you look at patients who have been in the ICU with COVID, they have a lot more of what's called this encephalopathy, where they have this delirium and they're there, but they're not there. And they're just sort of in the South, we used to call it out of your head. They would talk out of their head. And so, you have to reflect and say, well, is it because their families aren't there to help sort of reorient them? Or is it truly the impact of the virus on your brain? Ooh. And then is that part of the insomnia, right? Like there's a million questions and there really isn't a great answer yet.
So much for the bubble.
And so we just, it's a matter of just, you treat every patient as a patient, and what works for one isn't going to work for the other. And you really try to tailor it for, okay, well, let's walk this back. And what do you think will work for you? What do you think about nighttime yoga? What do you think about CBTI? About behavioral therapy? What do you think about these various gadgets? What are you comfortable doing? What about a sleep aid, right? And the philosophy is if you start a sleep aid, you have to have an exit strategy. I mean, it's just too easy to be on Ambien forever.
Yeah.
And so we always plan that too.
So, I mean, is there any kind of silver lining in this where, for example, there are people who have found good things that have come from COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing, is it easier to maintain sleep hygiene, for example, because of COVID or any of those things? Is there anything good that's going to come out of this for anybody's sleep?
Yeah, I'm a silver lining girl, so I'm forever looking at silver lining. So I think people are paying more attention to their health overall and their sleep. B, people are getting more sleep. Not everybody, but sort of the people that are able to work remotely, for example, they're not driving. So I have a guy that drives 111 miles each way, and now he's actually getting 2 hours more sleep, which is great because I've never been able to win, with that one, just because he had so many demands on his time. We are seeing that people are sleeping in. They're usually getting a higher, more hours of sleep. And so for a lot of people that were chronically sleep deprived, all of a sudden they feel great.
And yet, when all this is over, we're going to have to go back. And that's going to be interesting too.
But I hope we learn from this. Earlier we were talking about school start times. And we talk about this with my kids all the time, that, we're going to have to get back into the swing of sort of normal school hours. And in Minnesota, they've been pretty forward-thinking about delayed start times for middle school and high school. But that isn't the case across the country. And I'm hoping that we're going to learn from this and recognize that kids do better when we are more respectful of their circadian rhythm.
It's going to be interesting at a time when companies are time shifting because people are working from home, and it's, and there's more flexibility and all those sorts of things. We get to choose what we carry forward from all of this. We get to figure out what things, when we emerge on the other side, we want to go back to that were a part of our old normal. What do we want to bring forward from the old normal into the new normal? And what things are we going to carry forward with us that we've just discovered? Like, offices shutting down their swanky downtown office space and all those kinds of things. It will be interesting to see if this flexibility and the performance bump that some companies are seeing from their employees working from home, and maybe their day doesn't start until 10 o'clock, and maybe this and maybe that. It'll be interesting to see when we've spent so much time prioritizing our health, if we continue prioritizing our health when we don't have a pandemic to worry about.
I hope so. Although, I read something where they drew parallels to the pandemic, the 1918 pandemic, and then they traced it out to, is this why we had the Roaring Twenties? Because people were they needed to do something, right? That was just very hedonistic. They needed to go out and dance and drink and have a really, really wonderful time. And of course, then we had the Great Depression. And so is this something that we're going to follow, right? Or can we learn? Can we say, yeah, we all want to blow off some steam? Like, I know I, for one, am going to enjoy flying to conferences a lot more when I'm actually with my friends versus a virtual conference is convenient and it's very cool. And I watched the plenary session in my jammies, which doesn't go over so well in real life. but, I missed my friends. And so I'm going to really cherish those moments a lot more than I have in the past. And for me, on a day-to-day basis, I do telemedicine every day, and I hope we keep that. I think it's been really helpful for our patients. That's
one thing that Michael Grandner and I have talked about, and I've talked about it with a couple of other, not sleep-related psychiatrists and psychologists as well, is that they're talking about this idea that because of telemedicine, their patients have discovered that they don't have to go through the burden of jumping in the car, finding a place to park, yada, 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 dealing with traffic, all those things, so that when they begin their therapy appointments, they're actually calm and in a good place, and they haven't just walked in, from having been flipped off by 17 drivers and argued with someone over a place to park, and then you walk into your therapy session and you're frazzled. So there's a whole pile of people in that world who are going to walk away from this and go, actually, you know what? I'm going to close my office space and I'm just going to continue seeing my patients this way because it's better for my patients. The outcomes are better and they are in a better frame of mind when the sessions actually start. So maybe that's another one of those examples where, hey, we learned how to do this cool thing and look, we're going to continue doing it going forward. I hope there's more of that than there is of the Roaring Twenties. But you're right, when it becomes safe for us to all get on airplanes again and all of those things, it's inevitable. There's going to be a boom for the travel industry, for example, when we come out on the other side. It's going to be interesting to watch how long the boom lasts and what we learn because I know what'll happen is the boom will start before we're actually ready for it to start.
Of course it will, yeah.
And then there'll be a whole other wave and et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be an interesting roller coaster ride. And then we get to go and ride roller coasters again someday too, which...
Well, I hope that we all are going to be better about washing our hands. I hope we're going to be kinder when we finally wrap our brains around the idea that what I do impacts you. And I hope we sit back and recognize that our behavior directly impacts other people. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to just be kind. Extend somebody the benefit of the doubt. It's okay to disagree. We don't have to rip each other's heads off about it. Let's have a civil discourse. I hope we learn from what we've gone through for the last, 7, 8 months now.
Links to the North Dakota Centre for Sleep and to Seema's podcast are in the show notes and on our website at thesnoozebutton.com. There you're also going to find ways to leave us your comments, your criticisms, your reviews, even to donate and support the show or to ask a question of our panel of sleep experts. Till we get together next time, thanks for being here. My name's Neil Headley. Hey, get some sleep, would you?